Everyone, we are so glad you're here. Today, we've gathered you.
Welcome back into Fox 35 News Plus. Let's go ahead and listen in as this news conference gets underway. This is State Attorney Monique Worrell, who is getting ready to discuss the financial situation in the state attorney's office. Talked about announcing an audit, giving a budget update. Let's go ahead and listen in as her presentation begins.
All right, you guys can hear me good? Or well, rather. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. This is basically a update on the state of the office's financial affairs. Last week, I held a press conference telling you our first quarter report, which was an update on what we were doing in the office with regards to prosecutions and convictions. However, this is kind of a part two to that because I'm going to be talking today about the state of the office's financial affairs. Now, I've made a commitment to this community to seek justice with accountability and transparency. And in accordance with that commitment, I'm providing this update to the community regarding the current state of this office's finances. Upon returning to office, I inherited a multitude of challenges, including an $849,000 budget deficit. Now, $500,000 of that budget deficit is as a result of the loss of a victim advocates grant, and that happened to all state attorney offices throughout the state. Nonetheless, we are in a position, though, where that funding was needed to support the work of our victim advocates. Now, for those of you who don't know, victim advocates work with the victims of crimes to help them through the process so that they can understand the legal system and the legal process that they're going through, as well as to help bring them comfort during some of what is unsettling times, but also make sure that they understand every detail of every single court date. And we did not want to get rid of those people because we lost the funding, but what that did is it was a $500,000 deficit on our already strained budget. We were faced with severe understaffing in key legal roles, and that has stretched our managers and prosecutors thin. We have prosecutors managing caseloads in excess of 400, which is far beyond reasonable limits. And when you have prosecutors who are overburdened, it results in increase of legal errors, wrongful outcomes, speedy trial deadlines were being missed, and we're risking case dismissals because of that. There was limited time for victim and witness preparation, affecting the strength of cases and the trust from our communities. Escalating burnout among prosecutors, threatening long-term capacity and institutional knowledge that ultimately results in resignations. I have taken the following actions to address our budget deficit. We have requested a spending authority to provide funds to cover critical staffing needs from the JAC, that is our funding source for all state attorneys. I prioritize the hiring of frontline prosecutors over executive or administrative staff. So what that means is that I've gone without a chief assistant, I've gone without a chief of staff, I've gone without a public information officer. But I have also engaged the services of an audit because one of my priorities is protecting the public's trust and ensuring that taxpayer dollars are put to their best and highest use. I've engaged a full and independent audit of this office. Now, to my knowledge, such an audit has never been conducted. However, I believe this audit is necessary to ensure that we are maximizing the efficiencies according to the best practices in 2025. In an effort to stabilize the office, I focused on rebalancing resources to prioritize our core prosecutorial functions, including focusing on reducing the backlog of cases, as has been the center of the news for quite some time, continuing to working on more funding to hire more prosecutors, and ensuring that our victims and witnesses receive the attention they deserve by continuing to employ our victim advocates. I remain dedicated to my commitment to the rule of law and public safety, and the office is moving forward, united and aligned in our core mission. Now, I also committed to this community that I would run this office with transparency. And when financial mismanagement goes unchecked, resources are diverted, delayed, and sometimes lost altogether, putting at risk the effectiveness of our office and the well-being of our community. I ran on a platform of transparency, and that's in keeping with that commitment. I will be addressing my findings of wasteful and inappropriate use of funds, which has added to the financial strain of this office. Our budget deficit was compounded by this wasteful and inappropriate spending. I mentioned that we had an $849,000 overall budget deficit, and of course some of that was from the loss of the victim advocate grants. However, some of it was also because there were higher salaries under the previous leadership. There were people who left the office within 5 years and were able to return, making almost 50% increase in their salaries. Now, these increases were not in line with the current pay that was received by prosecutors, and sometimes it caused some unrest and unsettling by the individuals who were here and not making that salary. These increases were also not sustainable with the budget that had been allocated to this office from our funding source. By way of example, there was a husband and wife that were hired splitting one salary of $85,000. And during the time that they were here, they processed less than 100 cases. They were moved from department to department to department, proving to be ineffective in each place until they were finally let go right before my return to office. There's also a misuse of employee payouts, and I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail. The outgoing administration paid out $92,823.74 in payouts to their employees who did not meet the minimum time required to receive a payout from this office. So shortly, what I'm going to show you is the office policy that governs payouts and who is eligible to receive them. Generally speaking, you need to be here for 3 years in order to be eligible to receive a payout. These individuals were here for an average of 16 months, and they took $92,000 of this community's money as they walked out the door. Now, if we compare this to the payouts that were given to my administration when I was removed, they received payouts in the amount of $31,000. There were significant executive payouts to 2 executive team members totaling $77,000. One of whom received a retroactive pay increase after my reelection, ultimately inflating the payout that she was permitted to receive. She was also, that same employee was also permitted to transfer 480 hours of annual and sick leave to this office, in contradiction to the policy that allows the transfer of 40 hours of sick leave. That's 440 more hours than the policy allows. Now, let me be clear. There have been individuals who have come to the office and received more than 40 hours of sick and annual leave. But when I say more, I mean 50 hours or 100 hours, not 480 hours. And especially not someone who was only here for 16 months, because the policy specifically states that if you transfer hours from another agency and you leave before 2 years, that you are not eligible to receive any payouts. For your reference, I've included the policies that I'm referring to of this office. Those policies predate me and were here before I took office in 2021 and continue to be in effect upon me taking office again in 2025. Policy section 403-6 says employees will not be eligible to receive payment of unused annual leave until after 3 years of service with the office. 4037 specifically states that the 40-hour requirement that I mentioned and that any leave transferred will be forfeited if they have not completed their commitment to the office. In addition to the misuse of funds, there were irresponsible financial decisions that were made. $67,000 was paid to the Levitt Group. If you do a search on the Levitt Group, it's an airport concession company. However, this company received $67,000 for criminal justice advice. There was $9,800 paid to the Figures Foundation for 30 tablets, despite the office staff advising the administration that quality tablets could be purchased at a significantly lower cost if they were purchased on Amazon. This office has been left in debt to the University of Central Florida in the amount of $30,000 for a literacy program that was not paid prior to me taking office. The funding for this program had been denied by Orange County because of its overlap with existing programs. And funding authorization for this program was not previously approved through the JAC. And future approval is questionable because it is specifically unrelated to a prosecutorial function. The past administration's poor decisions contributed to the current strain that we currently are feeling financially within the state attorney's office, and it took away from the primary mission of the need for prosecutors to address our backlog of cases. After being reelected on November 5th, 2024, the appointed administration abandoned the primary mission of this office. And instead of choosing to put public safety over politics, they did the exact opposite in an attempt to subvert the will of the voters. On Wednesday, November the 6th at 7 a.m., an email, which you've mostly all previously reported on, was sent from Chief Assistant Ryan Williams at 7 a.m. in the morning. And in that email, he states, "The leaders of this office have no plans to begin looking for work elsewhere." Now, at that time, we all, and myself included with you, were wondering, well, what could he mean by that? Are they saying that they don't plan to leave the office? And what I've learned since I've returned is that that is exactly what it meant. From that point until I took office on January 7th, they abused their power and misused the resources of this office in an attempt to overturn the results of the election and to keep me from taking office. Staff members were pressured and intimidated into complying with the demands of the appointed administration under threat of professional consequences. No employee should be subjected to intimidation or coercion in an action that is politically or personally motivated. Not only did these tactics undermine morale and professionalism within the office, but it has also set a precedent for abuse of authority. It is imperative to acknowledge the misuse of resources that were used to launch this political attack, fueled only by selfish ambition instead of to pursue any legitimate ethical or legal concern. particularly during a time of budget shortfall, unmanageable caseloads, critical staffing shortages, and the constant turnover of state attorneys over the last several election cycles. Using taxpayer funds for politically motivated attacks raises serious questions about priorities, transparency, and the abuse of public trust. The justice system should not be used as a tool for political retribution, and I am committed to righting those wrongs, instilling balance, and restoring the morale of this office. Now, last week, I met with you all and reported that we had a strong and successful start to the first quarter. And thanks to the dedication of this team and their hard work, we've made significant progress in advancing our mission to serve this community with justice. Our most notable accomplishments this quarter include the conviction of several high-profile felony cases, a 70.49% conviction rate, and these convictions reflect our commitment to upholding the rule of law and ensuring accountability for serious criminal offenses. Our attorneys, investigators, and support staff have worked tirelessly to resolve these cases, and their efforts have directly contributed to safer neighborhoods and restored trust in the justice system. I remain steadfast to my commitment to accountability, transparency, and to always place public safety above politics. Thank you.
This time, we'd like to invite you, if you have any questions that are on topic, the state attorney's going to hang out for just a few minutes and do the best we can to answer those.
State Attorney Worrell, the grant money you mentioned you lost, is that a state or a federal grant? Can you tell us more about that grant money that was pulled from your office's budget?
I am going to not be a jack of all trades and instead allow my executive director to talk about that because she has more specifics on it.
Sure. The grant we lost was a federal grant. It was called VOCA, Victims of. I'm so sorry. Of course, I forgot the acronym on TV. Yes, a federal grant.
Was this part of the whole federal reworking with DOJ cutting back? Was that where this money was lost in the Trump administration's efforts?
No, this predated the current administration.
This was going to run out, and then you just came back to office without that $500,000. Okay.
Yeah, the grant itself lost funding years ago, and it's trickled down to this point where everyone has lost funding.
State Attorney Worrell, if you could please cover just, I know it's tied into with the backlog. How are things going with some of the extra prosecutors that Attorney General Empire finds your office? Where does the backlog stand? I know it kind of ties into some of these financial mismanagement allegations you're making.
Right. So essentially they started about a week and a half ago. And Kim, do you have an update on where we are in the numbers that have been processed at this point? I think at the end of last week we had about 100 cases.
Correct.
Okay.
That was as of May 2nd.
Okay. So as of May 2nd, they had gotten through about 100 cases. They have had a change in the person who's leading statewide prosecution. Nick Cox has stepped down, and statewide now has a new leader. So there's some transition happening over there that's caused a little bit of interruption, but those prosecutors are here and they're working towards helping us reduce that backlog.
So essentially the next steps from today's announcement is this audit to figure out, so I'm trying to do the math, these were the numbers. So what are the next steps in this audit? What do you hope to get out of that audit?
So essentially this office has mostly functioned the way it always has. And what I'm hoping to do now is to see in 2025, rather than functioning the way the office has functioned for the last 40 years, what are some efficiencies that we can use? Can we automate some things that we're currently using people to do, right? Are there things that we can do better so that we are using every dollar to its best and highest use? So that's what I'm after at this point. It's not to say, well, who can we fire? And it's what can we do to run our office with the resources that we have and do it most effectively and most efficiently.
Just on the current state of your office as well, where are you at with staffing? I imagine there was some turnover, so how many prosecutor positions do you have open at this point?
So there was very low turnover. upon my coming back to office, I'll tell you that the turnover that we did see upon my coming back to office was because the outgoing administration encouraged people to leave by January the 6th in order to get those payouts that I talked about, and to qualify for them. But even still, that was a very low number of people. We are experiencing the same regular turnover that the state attorney's office will experience because we have people who are making very low salaries and have very high caseloads. So I don't know what the current number is as of today. Camilla, do you know how many attorney vacancies we have open?
I wouldn't want to say.
Okay. Yes. So I think it's safe to say that there's about a dozen attorney vacancies. But as you remember, in my requesting more attorneys, it's more lines so that we can hire more experienced lawyers, because we can always bring in baby lawyers right out of law school. We do that every single July, but it's maintaining the experience that's important, and we can only do that with more dollars.
So while we've all reported on that memo that came out after your victory saying that we're not going to leave, essentially you're accusing them today then of cutting bait before you took office again and taking the money, right?
Well, I mean, I'm telling you what the facts are, and you can make your own assumptions with it. I'm telling you what my research has determined, that there was an exorbitant amount of funds paid in payouts, which doesn't typically happen. I can tell you that if you compare that $92,000 payout to the $31,000 payout that my staff received when they were terminated, then you'll see the inequity in it. I'm telling you that 2 executive team members received the bulk of that payout after only being here for 16 months. And that money was stolen from the people of this community. That money was taken from the people in this office, and I can't replace it. I can't get it back.
And one of those people was the person who penned that letter, correct? If I'm not naming that person publicly now. One was the person who wrote that letter.
Yes, Ryan Williams received $29,000 as he walked out the door.
State Attorney, at what point do you think in your budget process year you're going to get back to even or being on track? I know the fiscal year does not end until the end of, I believe it's September.
July. July 1 starts the new fiscal year.
Timeline is up.
Yeah.
Are you at the point now where you're back on track, or is that going to happen on July when everything is?
So for this budget year, there's no getting back on track. The damage has been done. What we have done is we've gone to JAC to ask for more authority to spend more money, and that is currently in the works. So that's going to help us get out of this hole. But part of the problem is that we were always underfunded, right? We were always facing a deficit. The interim administration just compounded that problem and made it worse. But it was always a problem, and it will continue to be a problem until our circuit is funded at the level that it should be for the number of cases that we're processing on an annual basis.
And just to be clear here, everything that you're alleging, this is all administrative and political, if you want to say, issues. Nothing is going to cross over into something that a court would be involved in. Is that correct?
So here's what I'm going to say. I am not going to use the resources of this office to investigate my predecessor. We are under-resourced, we are underfunded, and it would be downright hypocritical of me to stand before you today to say, I'm going to launch an investigation into all of the things that they did. I'm not going to do that. You can, make your own opinions. This office's primary function isn't investigating crime, it's prosecuting it. All right.
All right, there's no further questions. If you think of anything additional, just contact our Office of Public Information. I'd like to thank you for coming out.
A news conference from State Attorney Monique Worrell at her office in Orlando just moments ago there, as she announced and made a number of allegations of inappropriate and wasteful spending by the previous state attorney, Andrew Bain, who held that office after she was removed during her previous term, and he held that kind of in the interim until she was reelected this past fall and ended up taking office again. She talked about inheriting an $849,000 budget deficit. Now, she did mention that about $500,000 of that was from the loss of a victim advocates grant, and they decided they needed to keep those victims advocates in the office, so having to fund that a different way. But thousands of dollars, she's alleged, in wasteful and inappropriate spending, including some higher salaries than were typically in line with the current pay that she said were not sustainable. Also, she gave examples of a misuse of employee payouts and also some irresponsible, what she called irresponsible spending when it came to certain purchases, including one example she gave was tablets that were purchased through an organization as opposed to Amazon, where they would have been cheaper. All of this to say, as she discussed understaffing and her office and prosecutors stretched thin, talking about some of the steps that they are taking right now, including prioritizing the hiring of frontline prosecutors over those in administrative roles, and calling for an audit, saying that a full and independent audit is underway to maximize the efficiency of the office of the state attorney, talking about looking for any waste, looking for ways that they can be more efficient, also looking for anything that may be able to be automated, all to direct, she said, kind of rebalance those resources toward reducing the backlog of cases, hiring more prosecutors, a number of things that she discussed in that news conference there. So that was the state attorney talking about that. That her office has about a dozen attorney vacancies at the moment. She also was asked about the attorneys from the statewide prosecutor's office who had been brought in, that announcement from the attorney general a few weeks ago. She said they've helped to clear about 100 cases so far, so making some progress on that backlog, and also saying the bottom line is that she said her office, that the state attorney's office in the Ninth Circuit has always been underfunded, but that the interim administration, as she called it, made it worse with some of those spending patterns that she outlined in this news conference. We are going to take a quick break here on Fox 35 News Plus. I want to let you know this is a live look inside the Polk County Sheriff's Office, where we are awaiting a news conference there and an update on a shooting in Davenport that injured 3 high school students. So expecting an update any minute now from Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd. So we're going to step aside, take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more after this. News Plus, here is Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd walking in to give an update on the shooting in Davenport. Let's go ahead and listen in here.
And we're going to lay out what occurred on Saturday night, actually early Sunday morning. But the first thing I would like to say is I can remember growing up when my mother said nothing good happens after midnight. And we would kind of roll our eyes and think, what's she talking about? Well, this afternoon I am going to go over a classic example of why, when your mother told you nothing good happens after midnight, you can see that for yourself. This event is very frustrating to me, and the information we give you is really, really fresh, because this investigation started yesterday morning, so we've been in it just over 24 hours. 3 children, 3 teenagers were shot, and 3 children should not have been shot, but they were. And this investigation is still underway. We're in the preliminary phases of this investigation, and make no mistake about it, they made a horrible mistake when they crossed into Polk County, because we are going to do a detailed investigation of every phase of this event and hold everyone accountable that has violated the law. But this culminated at the end of a series of events into an active shooter. And as it's reported to us at this early stage, Osceola County, well, let me back up a step from that. Dr. Phillips had their prom on Saturday night. Jones High School had their prom on Saturday night. Those are both in Orange County. The three victims I'm going to talk with you about are from Osceola High School, and they did not have a prom on Saturday night. So when I give you this information, we have a mingling of information that's come to us so far. But with that, let's start so you can understand. The first video we're going to show you was at the Wawa, and we received a call about 2:14 in the morning. And they said there's a mob outside, there's fights, they're stealing drinks, they've got people blocked in, we can't do our normal business. Well, when we arrived 6 minutes later, we didn't find any fights, but we did see a lot of people who were leaving as we were arriving. And the Wawa manager said, hey, I want the parking lot clear. Just let's clear the parking lot because it is chaos here, and they're just coming in stealing stuff. So let's take a look at that. Do you think that they heard the sirens and so seconds later, the parking lot's virtually empty and everyone's fled. The Wawa manager at that point says, hey, things are under control. We saw no fights. We didn't see any fights on any video. We don't know if there were fights. That's still under investigation. But the 911 call that talked about mobs and fights and stealing drinks and people are blocked in and we can't have our normal business flow of traffic, we saw part of that. But 6 minutes later, we didn't see any fights. So now the deputies leave. And if you have ever had a chance to do a ride-along on a Saturday night, they go from call to call to call to call to call. So these deputies are now off in another piece of the northeast area in their district answering calls for service. When we start getting calls from the Azur Resort, A-Z-U-R Resort, which is really short-term rentals of loud music and a party. Now I want you to understand the Azur resorts are circled in red here. The Wawa is in blue. People, when we were arriving and the sirens are going off, people are now getting in their cars and they're taking off and running. But they've all left the area. Apparently, some period of time later, 30, 45 minutes later, they started gathering in the short-term rental area. There was at least one, I don't know if it was Airbnb, I don't know if it was VRBO, but there was at least one rental there that several people came and went from. So that call was called in at about 2:45, 2:55. Of course, now it's in the queue to be answered because we're going call to call to call to call. Then at 3:38, we receive an active shooter. and we'll show you a next clip of what we see. And I'm going to try not to talk while they play it, because when they play it, it feeds back. This. Cell phone video here, and then the next piece it'll feed back on me. Now, if you look real close, we'll play that one more time. If you look real close this time, on the far corner, you can see the muzzle flash of what appears to be a 223 or AR-15. I'll point out the area of the muzzle flash. It's going to be That was the active shooter that we received at 3:38. When we arrived, what we discovered, and I'll go over here and point it out. I don't know if the microphone will pick up. There was a car here, or some people here, shooting up here. You saw the muzzle flash from the AR shooting back here. So here's where the shooting was between two folks, sets of folks. Our victims were in a car behind and had no part of apparently the disturbance at all. They were just sitting in a car. They were all from Osceola High School. They were there at the party, at the event, but there's different pieces of information we've received. There was an argument, there was hollering back and forth, and then the first shots we heard sounded like they came from a smaller handgun, and then you heard the loud reports, and that came from the 223. When we did our follow-up investigation, there were a total of 36 shell casings. 33 shell casings and 3 firearms. There were 380, 9mm, and a 223. So there were apparently 3 shooting groups that participated. I want to underscore that the 3 juveniles, the 3 teenagers, the 3 high school kids that were shot had no criminal record, were not troublemakers. They were just where they shouldn't have been after midnight. So obviously, as soon as the shooting started, everybody ran. We sent deputies there. Our first victim I'm going to speak of, she had a gray eyes. Shrapnel in one of his eyes, and at this point we don't know if he'll ever regain vision in his eye. He may be blind in that eye from shrapnel. The third person is described as a Middle Eastern male. He's 18, and he had a slight graze on his forehead. That's his story. I've seen pimples that look worse, but there is a slight mark on his forehead. So I can tell you there's two people that absolutely unequivocally got through this by the grace of God. The third one has got a little scuff. I mean, if it came from shrapnel or if it came from a bullet, it was very, very minor. They were in the car. It appears that the car was the backstop for this shooting. So my question is, and there are many, I'm sure you have them, parents, where were your kids at 2:15, at 3:38 in the morning? These are high school kids. The second question I have is, why is it that there's over 100 people here and nobody knows anything? Nobody knows anything. I want you to think about that for a minute. I suppose 100 of them were in the bathroom and the other 25 just arrived after the event was over. That's all I can figure. But we have this magic thing called video. And we're working our way through a lot of video right now. So we know who 3 victims are. We have no idea who the suspects are at this point in time, but we will do our best to figure that out, because guess what? You're shooting at people on video. This should have never happened. And because kids made a poor decision to be out after midnight, they shouldn't have been shot. And how in the world they avoided seriously injuring someone, and I put a caveat there, if you don't know if your vision's coming back, that's serious. How we avoided someone being significantly injured to the point of death, I don't know. We found a second floor apartment with a bullet through the window and into the house. We found bullet remnants that have hit all of the different apartments. We found bullets that have hit vehicles. So it was a shootout. 2 opposing groups, for whatever reason, decided to have a shootout amongst what appears to be 100 high school and very young kids. That's not acceptable. We're not accepting that. Children have the right to be safe, and you can debate all day long whether they should have moved over to the parking lot, should they have been there. That's not my concern. My concern is somebody had a shootout in a parking lot full of kids. How crazy is that? And we're going to do our best, and we need help. It helps us with witnesses. So moms and dads, you need to lean in on your high school kids that were there and say, hey, if we don't do something tonight, what's to stop that bullet from killing someone next Saturday night or next Friday night or the next time there's a group of partiers that get together? I can also tell you that we have begged, we have pled, we have coached, we have taught these short-term rentals, these Airbnbs, these VRBOs, and I call them because they're 2 big brand names, but there are others, and said, don't rent local. Don't rent one night at a time. Don't rent to kids. And they still do it. and then the kids invite their friends, and their friends invite their friends, and the next thing it's on social media, and the next thing you know is you have people show up with guns and start shooting each other. Frustrates me very badly. So with that, let's look through the video. We'll look through all of them one more time, and then I'll answer any questions you have if I know the answers. But once again, we're in the initial stages of this investigation, and certainly anything I say subject to modification as we learn more. But let's look through the videos again. I just can't get over a shootout in a parking lot full of kids. Okay, questions?
Hi there, thank you for your time. Carolyn Coles with Fox 35. Two questions. One, was the party officially tied to an Airbnb rental or another short-term rental service? And has there been any sort of previous complaints or citations tied to that address where the party was held?
The party apparently moved around. We still have under investigation. Osceola Sheriff's Office shut down an Airbnb party in their county. Is that directly tied to this group? That's still under investigation. We know at the early stage of the investigation, there's at least one short-term rental in this complex. Was that directly tied to the shooting or all of these kids or social media and they all gathered that? That's still under investigation. But what we do know over historically, and I must say that until tonight, most of our short-term rentals have gotten better about doing one-night rentals and renting to young people. And what we explain to them, if you're renting to somebody from this county, from Osceola, from Orlando, and they're young, they're partying. Let them stay home and party. Why don't they stay home and party? Because their parents won't let them stay home and party. So all of that's under investigation. We have been focused. There's a lot of residual events to investigate, but we have been focused on trying to find out who shot these 3 high school kids. And as soon as we get finished with that, then we'll deal with these outlying events that occurred.
Sheriff, did the high school victims live at this complex? Were they visiting somebody?
We don't know why they were there other than for the party. They went to Osceola High School. They did not live there in the complex. They all three were in the same car, and it appears that the car was the backstop. The shootout happened between this car, and it caught the rounds as it passed by the shooters. We're just fortunate. We're just fortunate. But the people shooting didn't know, or they didn't care whenever they fled. And that's why I'm so angry that nobody knows anything, but your friends over here are shot. And nobody knows anything. Well, we're going to figure it out. And we're not going to stop this investigation until we have not only figured out the shooting event, but all of the subsequent events of violation of law around it.
Were the shooters in a car?
The shooters, no, they were not on a car. They were outside standing up, shooting back and forth. As you can see, the shooter with the AR was here. The other group was down here. And then the cars were here. So
A third shooter or just two?
we believe there were at least three shooters. We see 380 shells, we see 9mm shells, and we see 223 shells. So we believe there were at least three shooters.
Do you have any description of the vehicles involved in the shooting that were fleeing?
We don't know that the people that fled in a particular car, or if they fled on foot and got into a car elsewhere. Once again, we're early into the investigation, and we're having to get our investigative leads from the videos because no one saw anything. How healthy is that? How smart is that? You're going to let these people not be held accountable so they can go shoot at someone else? What are you thinking? How out of control is that? They will shoot again, and they may have shot before if nobody's telling on them, if nobody's helping us identify them, if nobody's calling Crime Stoppers and staying anonymous. They don't care about your life. They just shot through a parking lot with 100 kids in it.
Are the victims still in the hospital?
I don't know. The one victim probably is that has the significant eye injury because there was at least initial conversation that he was going to have to be transferred to a specialty hospital for this surgery. And our prayers are for him that he gets his vision back because they didn't know. It was a significant eye injury. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned Jones and Dr. Phillips. Do you know if the Osceola High victims were at those proms earlier in the day?
That's part of the investigation that's still ongoing to see who was friends or relatives with who and where they met up and are they connected to the Osceola. Osceola broke up a big party, after-prom party. And we know that there was at least a gathering in this complex. So once again, we have been focused down on who shot 3 high school kids at an after-prom party or gathering. And then we will work our way back from that in the ensuing days and weeks.
Do we know when Osceola High School has their prom?
Osceola's high school prom was in April. It was not, and I underscore not, Saturday night.
What is your message to other teens planning similar gatherings over the next few weeks?
Well, my first message is to the parents. You need to know where your children are, and they need to be home by midnight. They don't need to be carousing around at 2, 2:15, 2:30, 3, 3:30 to be shot at. So my first message is to parents, start being parents. When the prom's over, tell the kids to come home. If they want to have friends over, have them at your house where you can supervise and know where they are. That's how you have safe and healthy children that are alive and don't have bullet holes in them. The second thing to the kids, hey, get with your best buds, whoever you want to party with after the prom, and go to one of their houses with their parents there, have a good time, and be safe. And by the way, for the kids that were at this party or this gathering or this event, call Crime Stoppers if you want to remain anonymous. If you don't want to be known as outing your friends, call Crime Stoppers, but tell us who's shooting before they shoot some of your friends at another event. Any other questions? Thank you all very much for being with me today. Take care. Take care.
Well, that was Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, who was giving updates on this shooting in Davenport, where we know 3 teenagers were shot. They were students at Osceola County High School. The sheriff's office now looking for 3 potential gunmen that they believe, at least 3 was what the sheriff said, that they believe may have been involved in this. We saw some cell phone video, some doorbell camera video as well, kind of showing as this all went down over the weekend. It was involved a moving group, a large group that was believed to be out partying after prom on Saturday night. This happened around shortly before 4 o'clock in the morning. The 3 victims who ended up being shot in that exchange of gunfire were not allegedly not part of the disturbance. They were inside, sitting inside a car at the time. One of those victims, the sheriff says, may have lost their eyesight. They've reported to have debris in their eye and may not be able to see. Another one has a graze on their forehead. But the sheriff saying this simply is not acceptable for there to be a shootout like this in a parking lot full of kids. Again, they are trying to find who's responsible for this. 3 shooters believed to be involved in this, and the trouble, the sheriff said, is that many of the people they have questioned who were there and in that area are not being cooperative as they try to solve this. So that is the latest from Polk County, that shooting happening in Davenport, and some new details this afternoon with that.
Florida Live starts now.
Well, good afternoon to you, and welcome into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Weimer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon live on Fox Local, Fox13News.com, Fox35Orlando.com, and also on Fox Local. If you're just joining us, we just wrapped up hearing from Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd giving an update on a shooting over the weekend in Davenport that resulted in the injuries of 3 high school students sitting inside a car. One of them, the sheriff saying, may have lost their eyesight. The sheriff's office still looking for who they believe to be the 3 gunmen who were involved in this shootout in a parking lot full of high school-aged kids celebrating after prom, and a number of messages from the sheriff there saying, this happened so late at night, urging parents not to let kids out past midnight, and saying that many of the people who were there are not being cooperative when it comes to them trying to figure out what happened. And so this investigation continues, still very preliminary according to what Sheriff Judd was saying, but the bottom line, those 3 high school students shot while they were sitting inside a car, and the 3 people who were exchanging gunfire in the parking lot of the short-term rental area are still on the run at this point. So we'll have more on that coming up in a little bit. But we do have a lot to get to in this show today. We appreciate you joining us here this afternoon. I want to start with a new lawsuit against the state of Florida from a group called Florida Decides Healthcare. They are trying to put a ballot initiative, a constitutional amendment on the ballot for 2026 that would expand Medicaid in the state. They are now suing the state of Florida over the new law, HB 1205, that adds significant restrictions and limits and also some penalties when it comes to groups trying to put those amendments and initiatives on the ballot. They claim this is an attack on the First Amendment. They filed a lawsuit against the state over that law, saying that it is going to shut down these citizen-led efforts, and they spoke at a virtual news conference just a little bit ago.
The lawsuit filed in federal court argues that this new law is a direct assault on Florida's citizen-led constitutional amendment process, a vital democratic tool that gives everyday Floridians the power to propose ballot initiatives. HB 1205 violates the First Amendment rights to free speech and association, and it undermines the very foundation of participatory democracy in Florida. Let's not mince words. This bill is not about improving the ballot initiative process. It attacks the fundamental freedom of Floridians to participate in their own democracy. It is a calculated and cowardly attempt by politicians in Tallahassee to rewrite the rules, not to serve the people, but to protect their own power. This is not reform. This is repression. And we are calling it what it is, a direct assault on the voice of the people. Through the citizen-led amendment process, all Floridians from every race, every background, and income level have come together to pass policies that politicians wouldn't touch, raising the minimum wage, legalizing medical marijuana, protecting our water and land. And this process has empowered communities to create change when the legislature failed to act. But now, those same politicians, afraid of the people's power, are trying to strangle this process with red tape and intimidation. They've slashed the petition return window from 30 days to 10. They've added vague criminal penalties and punishing fines targeting well-intentioned volunteers who dare to lend a hand. They've imposed new bans on who can gather signatures, silencing entire communities of our fellow Floridians based on where they live, where they're from, or mistakes they've made years ago. They've even created a 90-day tolling period to block signature verification, deliberately stalling grassroots momentum. These are not tweaks. These are traps. These new rules are designed to make it nearly impossible for everyday people to have a voice in the laws that shape their lives, and to make sure that only the wealthy and politically connected have the means to get on the ballot. Florida already had the most restrictive ballot amendment process in the nation. This law is a machete taken to a system that needs a scalpel, punishing those who dare to organize, participate, and challenge the status quo. It is a bad faith power grab by politicians who are afraid of their own constituents. But we are not afraid. We are fighting back with this lawsuit. We are challenging this law because we believe in democracy. We believe that when politicians fail to act, the people have the right to step in. And right now, we are fighting to put Medicaid expansion in the hands of Florida voters where it belongs. Over 1.4 million Floridians fall into the Medicaid coverage gap, making too much to qualify for Medicaid and too little to afford private insurance. These are caregivers, essential workers, seniors, veterans, and our neighbors. And they've been left behind for far too long. Medicaid expansion isn't a partisan issue. It's common sense. In fact, a Mason-Dixon poll conducted just last month shows that over 78% of Floridians, including 7 in 10 Republicans, support Medicaid expansion. This overwhelming support cuts across party lines and reflects the collective will and values of Floridians. They know Medicaid expansion is an investment in our health, our economy, and our communities. But instead of letting the people vote, the governor and his allies are throwing up roadblocks because they know when Floridians have a say, progress wins. We will not let them silence us. We will not let them rig the rules. And we will not stop fighting until every Floridian has the freedom to vote on the future they deserve.
I think what's very clear here is that the right to circulate petitions is grounded in our First Amendment rights, and that is backed up by 2 very strong Supreme Court cases: Meyer versus Grant and Buckley versus American Constitutional Law. Both of those cases make it clear that circulation of petitions is core political speech protected by the First Amendment. There are some other cases that further lay out what those what specific provisions that have been struck down, and we believe that many of those provisions are very similar and analogous to the ones that we are challenging here.
I 100% agree with that. And honestly, those cases, the restrictions in those cases don't go nearly as far as what the Florida law does. And so this is dead on precedent, and they're cited in our brief multiple times.
One of the arguments that the governor has made is that there's fraud in the process. I assume you disagree with that. What's your just general reaction to the idea that there's some kind of, inappropriate conduct being done by people who are gathering these petitions or compiling them to submit them?
Carol, you want me to take
Yeah,
that?
Mitch.
All right. To be honest, that's a talking point and not the truth. And frankly, HB 1205 doesn't target fraud, it targets participation. This law wasn't written to fix a problem, it was written to create one for grassroots campaigns and everyday people. I just think this is making it much more challenging than actually addressing any of the governor's claims.
What level or what difficulty would obtaining Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers have on the ability to gather petitions in the volume needed to pass the thresholds?
I think that including that additional personal information is going, like, categorically to make it much more challenging to ask people for additional personal information. The challenge of Florida, where we already have an incredible hurdle to clear, again, as we've said, it was already one of the more difficult states in the country, arguably the most difficult to get a citizen-led ballot initiative on the process, collecting 900,000, approximately 900,000 valid signatures. Also incorporating asking people to put things like their Social Security number is clearly meant as a deterrent to make people feel less likely to give that information.
So that lawsuit has been filed in federal court. You heard some of the discussion there about that. Some strong words from Mitch Emerson leading that Florida Decides Healthcare, calling this, saying it undermines the democratic process and it doesn't target fraud, it targets participation. Those are many of the arguments we heard from critics of this bill when it was still being discussed in Tallahassee, but it has now been signed into law, and we will kind of see where things go from here with this first step in the legal fight against it. We're going to take a break here on Florida Live, but we'll be right back. Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Weimer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon live on Fox Local and on YouTube. It is time now for our Tampa Connection, and for that we go to Fox 13 digital content producer Nancy Gay. And Nancy, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Florida Live.
Thanks for having me, Garrett. We have a follow-up on the Clearwater Ferry, the deadly crash that happened last Sunday night. We are now learning that attorneys for some of the passengers who were on board that ferry are disputing what Jeff Knight's attorney says happened that night of the crash. Now, this happened around 8:30 last Sunday night. Knight's boat was seen on video crashing into the Clearwater Ferry, which had more than 40 people on board. That crash killed Jose Castro. He was a father of 2 little girls. Now, FWC investigators said they spoke with Knight after the crash, and he and everyone on board his recreational boat was cooperative with the investigation. They said Knight voluntarily did a breathalyzer test, which came back at 0.00. However, the FWC said no blood test was administered on Knight. Now, last week, Knight's attorney, Kevin Hazlett, sent 2 letters to investigators along with 3 witness statements from passengers who were on board Knight's boat. Now, Hazlett said one of Knight's passengers called 911 while Knight tried to render aid to the victims, and that Knight only left the scene once his boat began taking on too much water and first responders had arrived. Another passenger said that Knight was yelling that the ferry had no lights on. And in one of these letters, Hazlett also claimed that the ferry's crew was distracted by dolphins at the time of the crash. Now, attorneys representing the victims are releasing statements of their own. They say that Knight did leave the scene. In their words, quote, "He drove away, period, end of story." They also said blaming the victims for this crash is offensive and improper. If it was light enough out that the victims could see dolphins, why couldn't Knight see a ferry in front of him? The answer, quote, "Because he wasn't paying attention," end quote. As for Knight's claim that the ferry was not displaying the required navigational lights at the time of the crash and that Knight acted in full compliance with the Florida law, the attorneys for the few passengers on board the ferry say that Knight's actions were responsible, lawful, or in sound judgment is not the case. The video of the ferry crash was not ambiguous. Knight's failure to follow the relevant nautical rules is the primary cause of the collision of the ferry. Now, FWC is still investigating the crash and is asking for any video footage in the area between 8 and 8:45 p.m. last Sunday. That was April 27th. And Garrett, so far, no charges have been filed in this deadly ferry crash.
It's been interesting to hear kind of all the different sides of this. You know, we had heard last week from some of the people who were on board Knight's boat, now hearing more from some who were on the ferry. So just a lot of back and forth. Going to be interesting to see kind of where things go from here as these kind of legal battles just begin.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see because they have very different accounts of what happened, and that's probably one of the main reasons why FWC investigators are looking for any type of video that people may have had between 8 and 8:45 p.m. last Sunday night, just to kind of help them figure out what happened during this crash last Sunday night.
Yeah. Now we are getting closer to hurricane season, and the city of St. Pete is taking some proactive steps.
That's right. It's something nobody wants to talk about, but hurricane season is less than a month away, and the city of St. Pete is actually starting off this year with a resident task force. The city is joining the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and they are teaming up with flood-impacted communities for resiliency bus tours next Saturday. Now, the bus tour is going to Shore Acres and Riviera Bay. Those are 2 communities that are still dealing with the aftermaths of not just hurricanes Milton and Helene, but also Hurricane Idalia from 2023. The city is paying a third-party engineer to come in, discuss the situation with residents and city engineering staff. The residents say they are hoping to showcase what they think the problems are, and they are also hoping to gain some insight while the city is going to showcase what they think the problem is from an engineering standpoint. Now, one resident we spoke to said an idea that's been floated around is to build a seawall that's high enough to prevent storm surge. But each seawall is privately owned, so a lot of homeowners may have issue with that. Now, the city, according to the resident that we spoke with, would likely have to build a seawall that stretches 10 feet out from the property line and goes all around the city of St. Petersburg. Now, another proposed solution that's been tossed out is to build a dam system that's hydraulic and could raise up when a storm surge is potential. Now, one solution from the city that is already on the books is a stormwater pump station that will be built on Connecticut Avenue Northeast. Now, these bus tours, as I mentioned, are taking place next Saturday in Shore Acres as well as Riviera Bay. The bus tours are first come, first served, but the city says everybody is welcome to trail behind the bus. So if you want to be a part of this resiliency tour, but maybe you weren't the first in line, there is an opportunity to follow the bus and become a part of this conversation on Saturday.
Well, an important conversation to have going forward. And you're right, though. No one likes to think about us being that close to hurricane season, but it's just the reality of it, and you know, time to start getting things done.
Yeah, I know it's something nobody wants to think about, especially given what we went through last year.
Right.
But as we always say, the time to prepare is now, and not thinking about it won't keep the storms from coming. But as long as we're prepared and doing everything we can, hopefully it won't be as bad of a season as it was last year, but it is best to be prepared for the worst.
Right, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Let's wrap up here, Nancy, with a Bay Area teacher arrested facing charges.
Yes, that's right. A now former teacher at Pinellas Prep was arrested at a shopping plaza on Thursday because the affidavit said that he was trying to send obscene materials to somebody he thought was a child. Now, according to the complaint, in June of last year, Lee Hughes reached out to an undercover law enforcement officer about his interest in the undercover law enforcement officer's nudist household. Now, the undercover officer said he didn't respond back at first, but eventually he began communicating with Hughes, and the two kept in touch for the last 10 months. Now, this undercover officer said that he sent Hughes a photo of a purported 9-year-old girl, and that's when Hughes allegedly sent back an obscene photo to show to the girl. Now, according to the complaint, on several occasions, Hughes actually made reference to wanting child pornography of this purported girl. Last week, Hughes, according to this affidavit, actually traveled to a location where he thought he would meet with that undercover officer as well as the 9-year-old child with the intention of engaging in a sexual act with that child, and that's when he was arrested. Now, Hughes was a third-grade teacher at Pinellas Prep. The school said Hughes was immediately fired upon his arrest, and resources are available through both the school and through law enforcement for any members of the Pinellas Prep community who may need support. Garrett.
All right, there's some disturbing allegations there. Oh, that is today's Tampa Connection. Fox 13 digital content producer Nancy Gay. We appreciate you joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Weimer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon. Lawmakers are taking a week off this week in Tallahassee after 60 days of a legislative session that is going into overtime starting next week as they try to hash out a budget. But someone who is not taking the week off, John Kennedy, who is a Capitol Bureau reporter for the USA Today network in Florida. And John, we appreciate you joining us. I know that it's been a crazy few days, crazy few weeks covering the state capitol.
Yeah, it has had its moments of kind of, unrestrained chaos.
No doubt about it. You wrote an interesting piece kind of looking at this session now that the 60 days are over. And one of the things that struck me, were you kind of breaking down some of the numbers when it came to productivity of the legislature, specifically the bills that were passed.
Yeah, it's a lesser productive session this time around than kind of customarily. I just did some numbers on, the number of bills that were introduced and the number of bills that passed. This year, in the vicinity of about, I believe, about 11% of the bills introduced were passed by both the House and Senate. That compared to an 18% level last year. Every year there are vastly more bills than there are those that get passed. But this year seemed to be especially kind of dysfunctional, and they didn't get through a lot of the agenda that they had set out to do. A lot of big promises early on about tackling property insurance. That was something that the House Speaker, Daniel Perez from Miami, a Republican, that he wanted to do. That didn't really get off the ground. Some things did get done. A big condo bill that was very important to people in Florida's condo belt, which kind of is Southeast Florida and Central Florida, and then, of course, a lot of the Southwest. They've been struggling with trying to come up with first inspections of taller condo buildings and then money in the homeowners association reserve accounts. The legislature in the end cut a little bit of slack for some of these homeowners, although they're still kind of being kept to having to do inspections. This all comes out of the Surfside condominium collapse of a few years ago. So there's clearly a need to, from a safety point of view, for these condos to be inspected. But people were squawking about the amount of money that, in some cases, they had to come up with to do the repairs.
You talked about some of the tension of the session and kind of how things were able to kind of get a little off track. What was it that you think that ultimately kind of unraveled some of that greater agenda?
Yeah, the speaker, Daniel Perez, raised some issues with Governor Ron DeSantis. These went back to January when the governor called the legislature into a special session to enact immigration changes in anticipation then of what was President Trump's promised mass deportations. The legislature wanted to do it their way. They didn't want the governor to dictate what he wanted done. And that resulted in 3 special sessions in January and February. So in the end, they all sort of shook hands and agreed on what was passed back then. But that sort of set the tone that the legislature this year was not going to be sort of the rubber stamp that it has been for at least the last few years for Governor DeSantis. So once again, this year, issues rose where the legislature rejected the governor, which is, part of the system. But when Governor DeSantis had been a presidential candidate in 2023 and just for the very first part of 2024, the legislature was very subservient to DeSantis. And this is kind of a new spirit right now, this Republican revolution that we're seeing. And of course, one of the big issues that became a point of controversy was the House conducting an investigation of funding that went through Hope Florida, which is a sort of a social services support organization. It's a nonprofit, but it is founded by First Lady Casey DeSantis. And the House's investigation raised some troubling questions about money that came from a Medicaid settlement that was funneled through the Hope Florida Foundation, went to some political committees, and then ultimately was used to help the governor in his campaign last year against the marijuana ballot measure that was before voters in November that narrowly missed. But the governor was evidently was needing support in his clamor against that measure. The governor has insisted there's been no wrongdoing with money going into Hope Florida or coming out of Hope Florida. But the investigation, while paused right now, I think variations of it are going to continue in the House in coming months. So there's a lot of tension in the air, as you pointed out.
And all of this, as we know, the House and the Senate are still trying to come to an agreement on the budget and hash out some of those details. But it sounds like even as they get ready to return next week, that there is still a pretty substantial disagreement on allocations even at this point.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an unknown right now. We haven't gotten too much detail other than on the very last night of the session, about 2 hours before the legislature was set to adjourn at midnight Friday night. They announced that they had what they called the framework of a budget agreement. And, we don't have too many details on what's coming up, but the two budgets, one passed by the House and one passed by the Senate, they were $4.4 billion apart. So that's a lot of dollars to cover, and it also involves a lot of policy issues as well. So the speaker had announced that the budget that they're coming in with, again, it's very broad right now, but it sounds like the Senate has come down a little bit in its spending priorities, and the House has come up a little bit in its spending priorities, which, is the framework of a deal, I guess, where the two sides move a little bit more toward the middle. But we're going to see as budget conferences begin next week, just where the areas of agreement and, still lingering disagreement are.
So yeah, what do we need to watch for when it comes to that extension of the session? It's what, May 12th through June, I believe.
Yeah, it's into June 6th, which is remarkable. That's an inordinate amount of time for them to decide what they have to decide, it seems like. But there may be some strategy involved there where I think the House is possibly anticipating that the governor is going to veto a lot of whatever they decide on in the budget. And they may want to try to do it again. Again, the budget year for the state begins July 1st. So they're under a bit of a deadline right now to try to get it done. But yeah, I mean, some areas that to watch, environmental spending is something that the governor has, made a very much of a signature issue for him through the years. And I think this year the legislature is going to dial back some of that environmental spending. The spirit in Tallahassee right now seems to be that they want to spend less this time around. Part of it is that state economists have warned that in the next 2 years they could be facing budget deficits. So the warning from economists is sort of like start curtailing spending. So I think we were already going to start seeing that. And, there's a little bit of the spirit of, Elon Musk and Doge also filtering down to Tallahassee, since these are, the Republican supermajorities in the legislature who are, holding a lot of allegiance to the Trump White House. So I think there's a whole movement right now, kind of anti-government, anti-spending. So we're seeing a little bit of that right now, too. I don't think there's any chance of a across-the-board state pay raise for the state workers to come through. That's another issue I think that's probably dead on arrival right now. But yeah, there's a million pieces to this budget. So I think generally we're going to see some belt tightening across the board.
All right, John Kennedy, Florida Capitol Bureau reporter for the Tallahassee Democrat and USA Today Network, Florida. Always good talking with you, and we appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Florida Live.
Same here, Garrett. Thank you for the time.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Weimer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon live on Fox Local and on YouTube. We started our show at the conclusion of a news conference from Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, where he was breaking down the information that we know about this shooting in Davenport that resulted in 3 teenagers being shot. Deputies now trying to find who was responsible for firing those shots. They believe at least 3 people were involved in it. I want to play for you a segment of that news conference in case you weren't joining us, where the sheriff kind of walks us through some of the video, cell phone video and other sources of video from that area, showing kind of what was going on and what you can see about the scene and the situation that has helped investigators to this point as they continue to look for who is responsible.
Let's start so you can understand. The first video we're going to show you was at the Wawa, and we received a call about 2:14 in the morning, and they said there's a mob outside, there's fights, they're stealing drinks, they've got people blocked in, we can't do our normal business. Well, when we arrived 6 minutes later, we didn't find any fights, but we did see a lot of people who were leaving as we were arriving. And the Wawa manager said, hey, I want the parking lot cleared. Just let's clear the parking lot because it is chaos here, and they're just coming in stealing stuff. So let's take a look at that. Do you think that they heard the sirens and So seconds later, the parking lot's virtually empty and everyone's fled. The Wawa manager at that point says, hey, things are under control. We saw no fights. We didn't see any fights on any video. We don't know if there were fights. That's still under investigation. But the 911 call that talked about mobs and fights and stealing drinks and people are blocked in and we can't have our normal business flow of traffic, we saw part of that. But 6 months later, we didn't see any fights. So now the deputies leave. And if you have ever had a chance to do a ride-along on a Saturday night, they go from call to call to call to call to call. So these deputies are now off in another piece of the northeast area in their district answering calls for service. When we start getting calls from the Azur Resort, AZUR Resort, which is really short-term rentals of loud music and a party. Now I want you to understand the Azur Resorts are circled in red here. The Wawa is in blue. People, when we were arriving and the sirens are going off, people are now getting in their cars and they're taking off and running. But they've all left the area. Apparently, some period of time later, 30, 45 minutes later, they started gathering in the short-term rental area. There was at least one, I don't know if it was Airbnb, I don't know if it was VRBO, but there was at least one rental there that several people came and went from. So that call was called in at about 2:45, 2:55. Of course, now it's in the queue to be answered because we're going call to call to call to call. Then at 3:38, we receive an active shooter. And we'll show you a next clip of what we see. And I'm going to try not to talk while they play it, because when they play it, it feeds back. This cell phone video here, and then the next piece it'll feed back on me. Now, if you look real close, we'll play that one more time. If you look real close this time, on the far corner, you can see the muzzle flash of what appears to be a 223 or AR-15. I'll point out the area of the muzzle flash. It's going to be That was the active shooter that we received at 3:38. When we arrived, what we discovered, and I'll go over here and point it out. I don't know if the microphone will pick up. There was a car here, or some people here, shooting up here. You saw the muzzle flash from the AR shooting back here. So here's where the shooting was between two folks, sets of folks. Our victims were in a car behind and had no part of apparently the disturbance at all. They were just sitting in a car. They were all from Osceola High School. They were there at the party, at the event, but there's different pieces of information we've received. There was an argument, there was hollering back and forth, and then the first shots we heard sounded like they came from a smaller handgun, and then you heard the loud reports, and that came from the 223. When we did our follow-up investigation, there were a total of 36 shell casings. I'm sorry, 33 shell casings and 3 firearms. There were 380, 9mm, and a 223. So there were apparently 3 shooting groups that participated. I want to underscore that the 3 juveniles, the 3 teenagers, the 3 high school kids that were shot had no criminal record, were not troublemakers. They were just where they shouldn't have been after midnight.
We're going to take a break here on Florida Live, but we'll be right back. Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Weimer. Thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon, live on Fox Local and on YouTube. A self-proclaimed sovereign citizen was arrested over the weekend for the second time in 10 days, accused of driving with a fake tag and also refusing to comply with deputies. He was arrested in Volusia County and was out on bond when he was arrested again on Saturday evening. You're about to see that body camera video. He is now facing multiple charges. And earlier today, Fox 35's Marie Ettinger spoke with Volusia County Sheriff Mike Chitwood about the dangers of these situations and what people should know.
Okay, so what I feel like once in a while, like not frequently, not infrequently, we run into people who just think like they are sovereign citizens, the law does not apply to them. What's that like for you?
You know, first, what you have to look at is just last year in 2024, a Dallas police officer was killed during a car stop with one of these clowns, and they're dangerous clowns. On August of 24, a sovereign citizen live streamed his shootout with law enforcement when he was stopped for traffic violation. They eventually killed him. And think of what happened in Polk County last year in Lakeland. Deputies approach a guy in a park after hours who turns out to be a sovereign citizen. He shoots the 2 deputies, and the deputies return fire and kill him. So, this isn't really a joke, even though I used the term, he's a clown. And with modern technology out there, the second time he got stopped, his information was put into modern technology and alerted the deputies that he's out riding around again. So I'm hopeful that we've asked for a bond revocation. We asked that he be held without bond. We want to impound this truck. We want him to understand you just don't type up documents. And you hear some of the things he refers to, his live birth paperwork that's in his car. It doesn't fly. It's illegal. You don't have the right to do it, and you're going to be arrested. But, we do train on this. We do train that if you go back through history during car stops or confrontations, these people do turn deadly. And I do know that a lot, they do file tons of frivolous lawsuits that tie up the court system when it comes to challenging people's legitimate business owners, legitimate homeowners, their property rights. So they're dangerous. They need to be monitored, and law enforcement needs to, stay on top of them. And listen, I'm proud of what my deputies did. You refused to comply with us. They were much more respectful than I would have ever been. Because after I broke the window, he would have been ripped out by the scruff of his neck. Because it's the second time we've gone down this road with you, and you just don't get it.
When you're saying they, in this context, you're talking about people who view themselves as sovereign citizens.
These sovereign citizens who have their own driver's license and their own license plate, and they don't adhere to any law other than, which is interesting because what they do say is the only law enforcement agency they respect is the county sheriff. But yet this guy continues to drive around in the land knowing that's our jurisdiction, thinking, hey, I'm going to present these documents and you're just going to let me drive on. But that's not going to happen.
Explain to people like it doesn't exist. Like every person is subject to the law of the community that you are in.
If you don't want to drive a vehicle on the highways and byways of the United States of America and the state of Florida, take a bus, get a bike, ride a horse. But if you're going to operate a motor vehicle, there are laws there. Your car must be registered with the state of Florida. You must have a Florida or a valid driver's license. You must have insurance. These are things that we all do, right? It's a social responsibility of all of us to obey the law, not just go off the reservation and say, you know what, I'm not doing that. I don't respect the federal government. I don't respect state government, local government. I'm just going to type up my own documents and slap my own tag on the car. He's an uninsured, unlicensed motorist. What happens if he runs into somebody or runs over somebody or leads us on a pursuit and kills somebody? There's no anything there. There's no liability. There's no nothing, and you're left out in the cold for what you're doing. What is your social responsibility, which is to follow the law.
How do you convince people that they are subject to that law, even if they don't believe themselves to be?
You're not going to convince them because you're talking to people who are completely divorced from reality here. Okay, they believe what they believe, and they're just going to continue going on that way. I mean, look at it. Look at what they're doing. A traffic stop. A Dallas police officer was killed last year. A traffic stop where the guy live streams the shootout with law enforcement and eventually is killed. And then it would happen in Polk County. So these are people that in some ways are willing to die for what they believe in. And that's what makes them extremely dangerous to all of us.
I was just going to say, like, I can understand how that would wind up so dangerous so quickly because if they to their core believe that you have no authority over them and you're, as you said, like hauling them out of the car, if somebody's getting physical or somebody's telling them what to do and they're not complying, I can see how that would escalate so quickly if they just don't respect that sense of authority. Like, that's got to be scary.
It is because you're dealing with somebody, again, who is willing to take a life and lose their life over these beliefs. If you watch that video closely, and you watch where the deputies break in the window, he tells the other deputy there, cover me, because he knows he's going to have to use both hands. He can't have his firearm out. And if this guy comes up with a weapon, he needs to know that, what's going to happen. And, thank God this guy, once he was taken out of the car, he complied, just as he did the last time, a couple of days ago when we arrested him, he complied. But this is an anomaly. Normally they're not complying. Normally there's a fight. Now, the first time he just went along with the program. The second time he's like, I'm not getting out. You have no right to stop me. If we go the third time, we're going to be having a different conversation, I believe, because the other parts of these sovereign nations are probably going to get this guy to arm himself and indoctrinate him even further. So I'm worried if he gets out, what's going to happen next. And believe me, I have all the confidence in the world the courts are going to let him out.
So what happens next for you guys then? I mean, you just wait around and hope things go well? Or, I mean, I know it's not hoping, I know you train a lot, but.
Well, I am hoping that a judge denies him bond. Clearly, he does not want to comply with the law, and he's held, and then we go to trial, and then he'll be found guilty and go to jail. But again, you're driving without a license. You have your car's unregistered. There's traffic violations there. There's only so much you could do. He's going to get back out. He's going to get behind the wheel of a vehicle again. And that's the danger to the public and to law enforcement is that.
I was going to ask what it was like for you seeing it happen a second time so soon.
It was, I received a alert as soon as they stopped him that you're not going to believe this. Guess who stopped again for a traffic violation? And the same thing is happening. And they had to forcibly remove him from the car. And that was probably within, I don't know, 5 minutes of them stopping him again. And you just shake your head and like, thank God, he's in custody and everybody's going home safely. Even this knucklehead is going to jail safely. And all my deputies, they did everything that they needed to do. And, that's the way it goes. Some people think that I have the right not to roll my window down. I have the right not to comply with lawful orders. Guess what? You're getting your window knocked out.
I think from the public's perspective, it's easy to look at this and laugh and be like, oh my God, again, like he just got caught. And for you, you're like, I'm just glad everything went well.
Because I know in my profession, I remember distinctly what went on in Polk County last April. I remember clearly it was all last year, where a police officer in Dallas was killed during a traffic stop. And I remember the guy that live streamed, the sovereign citizen that live streamed getting pulled over by the deputies in Texas and then fleeing and then engaging them in a gun battle where he was terminated. But that's the first thing when I hear that, it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, because it's not a regular car stop. It's somebody who does not respect the laws of the land. And in some cases, if they are fervent believers in this, they are going to use violence to take someone out, knowing full well they're going to get taken out as well.
That was Sheriff Chitwood talking about the so-called sovereign citizens who believe that those laws do not apply, that the law enforcement does not have authority over them, and discussing what he believes to be the dangers of those situations. Well, that is going to do it for us here on Florida Live this afternoon. We appreciate you joining us on what has been a busy day here in Central Florida, and we appreciate it. We do know and are still standing by for one more update today on another deadly shooting, this one in DeLand. It happened at the McCabe's Bar on Saturday after investigators say a fist fight broke out. Victim ended up being shot 6 times and dying. 32-year-old Kashad Harris of DeLand. We know the bartender was also shot while trying to break up the fight. The suspect at the last update had not been found. We do expect an update from DeLand police coming up at 4 o'clock. So if you're watching us on Fox Local Orlando, we will have that for you when that begins on Fox 35 News Plus. But we appreciate you joining us this afternoon. It is a beautiful day across the state of Florida. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here at 2 p.m.